So the other video, I was saying that even I have to go back to the instructions. So we've got step one, the salutation. I've demonstrated to you how you copy and paste your original response into your peer thread, not your own thread. I also went over a missing requirement between step one and two. And we are now at step three. Okay, so there's another thing that I would like for you to present in your response as a whole, and that is going to occur between step two and step three. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that is. I'm also going to teach you something else with respect to editing something that you might have put in your peer response. So let's go ahead and go in here. Keep in mind that once I do grade something, even if you submit it early, that is the grade that you have earned. I don't have time to grade anything multiple times in a 5-week session. So let's go back to here. So let's say you accidentally clicked submit or whatever. All you have to do is go back to the peer response that you're working with. And then you kind of hover. Okay, so let me adjust this so you can see what I'm talking about. So you go down here and then you hover, and then you should get this edit option. All right, so then what you do is, and I'm only gonna grade if I see a complete, response. But now I can go back and, work on whatever I was working with. So we've completed, we've gone over, let me move this, step one and step two, and now we're getting ready to go to step three, where we construct those paragraphs about a similarity and difference. But what I want to go over now is another missing requirement. So now between step two and step three, I want you to do a couple of transitional sentences. One might even say like a mini paragraph. And while this is not an essay, this does again provide some context. So there's remnants of an essay-like format here. But as you can see, it's still a unique kind of assignment. So here what you do is before you actually start discussing a similarity or a difference in your arguments, what you should first start off doing is note the conclusions. Just say something about the conclusions you argued for. So for example, write a sentence saying, we argued for the same conclusion, and then tell me what conclusion was that. You could probably do that in one statement or two statements. That said, I don't want you to focus on the conclusion. So remember the step three instructions. Let's go back to the instructions here. This says what? Let's go back up here actually. Focus your discussion on the support your respective responses offer for the first statement in your conclusion. So that's still true, but it's good to have a kind of transitional sentence from step three, sorry, from step two to step three. So do say, do note what the conclusions were. Did you argue for the same conclusion? If so, what is it? So write two sentences that answer the following questions. Did you argue for the same conclusion? Okay, so respond to that in a full sentence using my question prompt. If you did argue for the same conclusion, what was the conclusion that you both argued for? So here you don't cite evidence from each other's text, because this is not where you're discussing yet what a similarity or difference is, because that has to focus on the reasoning, the support for the conclusion. You're just noting the conclusion in your transition between step two and step three. So if you did argue for the same conclusion, then there's no reason to quote from both of your responses, because, like I said, that's not where most of the work is done. This is just transitional. But also, you were supposed to copy the same sentence if you took a definite position. Actually, it didn't matter what kind of sentence you copied. But if you do have the same conclusion, then they should be exactly the same, right? Because you were supposed to copy the conclusion, whether it was a definite position or something about, I can't make up my mind yet. But you should say what that conclusion was. You don't have to put it in quotation marks, even though I did ask you to copy the first sentence. So again, transitional sentence. Say something about we argued for the same or a different conclusion. If it's the same, then say that, and then just tell me what that conclusion was. We are both argued for the conclusion that. If you argued for different conclusions, then say that. Say you argued that, and what was our conclusion? While I argued this. This is my conclusion. So notice that you could also say that if somebody said they were wearing a mask of their own free will, and somebody said they were not wearing a mask of their own free will in their first sentence, their conclusion, their main point, you could even somehow find a way to embed the phrase opposing conclusions. So we argued for different conclusions. In fact, they were blank conclusions. And then you can state what the conclusions were. So make sure that when you're doing that, if you didn't have the same conclusions, if you have different conclusions, make sure I know when you are citing your conclusion and when you're citing your peer's conclusion. So you can say, you concluded that, comma, quotation marks. There you could go ahead and cite the conclusion since it's different. And then you can say, well, I concluded that, comma, quotation marks. If it was an opposing conclusion because one person said, I was free, and the other person said, I was not free, then you should embed that phrase in your transitional sentences somehow. Now, some of you might decide, some of you will have a set of responses such that one of you took a definite position. I am wearing a mask of my own free will, or it's not rational for me to decide. Those are still different conclusions. Those conclusions don't necessarily oppose each other, because when you say it's not rational for me to take a definite position, that's exactly what you're saying. You don't have one yet, whereas the other peer does. Now you can note that. You can say, well, I took a definite position, and you can see this in my conclusion, whereas you did not, and we see this in your conclusion that, right? So keep all of this in mind as you work on your transitional sentences, mini paragraph that provides a little bit of, I guess you could say this isn't so much providing assignment context, like why do those arguments exist in the first place, right? Like from step 1 to step 2. This is getting more into the arguments themselves. So you're just kind of giving the gist of what the conclusions were. What did your peer argue for? What did you argue for? Not the actual argument itself, not the reasons. Just tell me, did you argue for the same conclusion? If so, what was it? Did you argue for a different conclusion? If so, were they opposing conclusions? That means you took a definite stance, your peer took a definite stance, but they oppose each other. Or did you argue for different conclusions? You took a definite stance. What was that conclusion in the form for your definite stance? And your peer or yourself decided you couldn't take a definite position. So what conclusion was that? Okay, so that's just kind of warming up, getting your peer, the reader, so to speak, ready for what's to come. Okay, so the idea here is that as you're discussing a similarity or difference, it has been reviewed and made clear, and you can imagine that maybe somebody got a copy of your communication and they're reading it. It is clear what conclusion the reasoning is supporting. Your peer might know what their conclusion was, you might know, but we're trying to make a beautiful, coherent, detailed, fluid piece of communication here, of writing and thinking here. All right, so continuing on, this is the missing requirement then. So then you go on to step 3. So I'm not going to go into any examples. I'm not going to flesh out an example, but I am going to show you what this looks like in terms like the general template for the rest. So for step 3, you know that you should have a paragraph about a similarity or difference, okay? Then you should have another paragraph about a similarity or difference, okay? Remember, you have to focus on a similarity in one paragraph and a difference in another paragraph. If you want to start with the similarity, that's what you want to talk about in your first paragraph, that's fine, but then you have to talk about a difference in your second paragraph, vice versa. You want to start off talking about a difference in your first paragraph in terms of like step, like the actual analysis. Because if this is a paragraph, then technically this is a paragraph as well. And of course, these are paragraphs, but you know what I mean. Your similarity, difference, discussion paragraphs. That's what I'm talking about. Just make sure that you focus on a similarity in one paragraph and a difference in another paragraph. I don't care which one you focus on first. So then you'll do that. And let's just go over generally. This is just the template. So while I'm not going specifically into the content, I just want to give you kind of what the template looks like in terms of this. And so, yes, you can follow the template, and I'm okay with that. I will not accuse you of plagiarizing as long as you don't, plagiarize in any way from any examples that I give you. But basically, you're going to have a sentence that makes a claim. Well, and this is going to be true for each paragraph, right? So keep that in mind. True for each paragraph. A sentence that makes a claim about a similarity or difference, okay? And then you're going to have a sentence that introduces and cites evidence from your argument. And then you're going to have a sentence that introduces and cites evidence from your peer's argument. This, I would like for you to do it in this order because it will be easier for me to follow and grade. It'll make it more efficient if everyone follows the same sequencing of information. Just like up here, you present your argument and then your peer's argument. Down here, I would like for you to present your textual evidence from your argument and then your peer's textual evidence. And I already went over how you can word that in another video, right? So you can't just plop down a quote. You have to use a phrase to introduce the quote, like I said in my statement, I wrote, you wrote, you said in your argument. Okay, and then you need at least 3 sentences that unpack in detail, in depth, how the quoted content reveals your claimed similarity / difference. Okay, so when you're doing this, that's when you're going to pluck words out of probably each of your quoted statements. Okay, kind of like when you were doing argument by definition, you're supposed to pluck words out from within the definition and incorporate it into your reasoning. Here you can pluck words or word phrases or whatnot from the quoted material to build your case for a claim of similarity or difference. Here's another warning, guys. And what you will want to do is, I think you should write the warning here. Another huge mistake that some students make, not a lot, but some, is what they do here is all they do is summarize. It's okay to use one of your sentences here to paraphrase or to restate in different words something that you cited. That can be cool to make sure that, because that shows that you understand where your peer is coming from, or it presents your peer with another way of understanding what it is that you quoted from your own response. So you can do that once. You can paraphrase yourself once, your statement once and your peer's statement once. But after that, you need at least 2 sentences that shed light, that explain in depth, in a detailed way, how those statements reveal a similarity or difference. And that means really unpacking the wording, the meanings of the words in your statements. It could also be about the general angle of approach in terms of your support and how that's revealed in those statements. So make sure that the statements or the sentences that come in this part aren't just summarizing. I have read submissions where students just repeat over and over again the statements in different words, but they don't shed any light on how the cited statements, the evidence from each argument provides any support, shows, reveals, can be used to argue the case that there is some similarity or difference. So please don't make that mistake.